Hello everybody, it's really, as everybody has said before me, it's really a pleasure to be here to see so many people involved in this project, trying to determine what could landscape mean for South America, or what can we actually learn from this specific context to overall enrich the discussion about landscape as urbanism. As Felipe and Charles mentioned before, I am Italian, so my experience from here is going to be a much shorter one. But I want to just present a project, a research project on which I have been working for a year and a half now. My colleagues Felipe Vera and Luis Valenzuela, that I'm here from Universidad Adolfo Ibáñez, invited me to join. So I believe that I'm just presenting this project because I believe that it can shed some light on the processes that are going on in the region, and I'm talking about the Andean region, but also in other parts of South America, and that really suggest landscape as a very appropriate medium to look at these processes, and also can be applied to other conditions of contemporary urbanism across the world. As most of you may know, Chile is one of the main exporters of copper in the world. Like almost 1/3 of the copper that is exported in the world is exported by Chile, and a lot of this production actually comes from Calama, the region of Calama, which is in the Atacama Desert in the north of Chile. And so Calama is, as we have seen, is at the center of all these extraction territories, and it's a city of middle size of around 150,000 inhabitants that recently came to the news because of a lot of protests of its inhabitants that were fighting for a very unequal distribution of wealth. So through the years it had become evident that mining really affects the social and environmental ecology of the region through its inhabitants. And so Calama, as many other centers across South America that are at the center of a production and extraction economy, gives it, the growth of its urbanization is very much related to the extraction economy. And so its population, really in the last 50 years became 6-7 times, growth 6-7 times. But what became evident working in this context for a year and a half, and our colleague Luis Valenzuela for much longer, and Felipe, is that actually we can, if we say population, it's not one homogeneous group. I mean, this happens everywhere, but in this case it's really striking. So if we take, for example, the citizens, these are one population, and citizens are the people that belong to the municipality, people that have right to vote, people that pay taxes and expect several services in exchange. And these are the people that are mainly leading the protests because of their expectations, and that are people that belong to the place, recognize themselves in it. But of course, there is another group which is extremely extreme influence in the region and in the city, which are the commuters, which are the people that work for the mining companies or for the subcontracting companies or for all the other services that are related to it. And this image shows, for example, the number of flights that every day fly to the city of the people that will work in one of the mines around its territory. And this population, more or less 10,000 people are moved every day there, so it's equals 10% of the population. And this also includes not just daily or weekly commuters, but also people that may live in the city for a very specific time related to a project, which could be weeks, months, years. And then, of course, have a different impact on the city. They don't take the city in the same way that the citizens do. A third group, which, of course, they are also citizens, they're not populations, but they deserve, let's say, a specific attention because these are the people who have inhabited the area for centuries. Like their ancestors have been living in the oasis, which was one of the largest in the world. And they have a very special relationship to the territory. Like agriculture has been there for centuries, and now it's really put at risk by a fourth group, which is those of the stakeholders. Stakeholders are the executives of the mining companies or the other subcontracting companies that have a different relation, of course, with the territory, and they may not even live there. Or go very sporadically, but nevertheless, their decision really affects what is going on in the city and in the region in general. So here, just some images, no, of it's evident here how any of these groups and decisions that these groups make really affect the territory. So the question here is, how can landscape provide a medium to go beyond to solve this crisis which is happening in these territories and that traditional urbanism has a really hard time in addressing? I'm not going to go through this, okay, but of course we know for many years, decades now, how landscape can provide a medium to look at urbanism. Charles Waldheim has been the main reference for this, no? Once we understand that actually the resources in the world are limited, and every transformation has an impact on the territory, and this has to be addressed at different scales. So if we look, this is happening everywhere, and I mean landscape has already provided a lot of useful insights for looking at territories of extraction, and I believe that in this area this is particularly extreme because you can see it's like a flat land. It's unavoidable to see what the results, for example, of extraction are, what's the dimension of waste related to the city, related to the oasis, which is the small green side on the left bottom corner. By the way, this is research that I'm saying that I'm doing with my colleagues and it's going to be published soon. So the first point that came out about this research project and that is the fact that when looking at this territory, of course, the city of Calama trying to solve some of the problems, it's not enough to just look at the city, no? As Luis Valenzuela claims, it's the time in which a mine had a mining city that was related to it has passed. If now we want to look at the phenomenon and understand it, we have to think about mining districts, because of course the number of infrastructure that this activity requires and the flow of energy, food, people, and the conflict that this generates have to be understood at the territorial and regional scale. Another aspect that emerged from this research project, so this, for example, shows the enclave of Calama, which is not just the 2-3 main mines around it, but has a much larger impact on the region. A second point that has been highlighted by this research project is that, of course, every productive operation, and especially extraction, because it's really related to the resources that are available, has a deadline. Like it's a very temporary condition, no? What Rotra and Felipe Vera would call ephemeral urbanism. Anytime a new center develops next to a mine, its future is very much related to the activity of the mine itself. And this prevents cities to become cities, and actually most of the time they're just seen as camps because they are related to this specific function. A third point, which I believe really puts landscape in the first place, is the fact that landscape as a resource and a concept is really the hinge with which this territory can rely on in order to exude its potential. It's because landscape is what the inhabitants can really identify with, and we, as designers, can find the vision to absorb, mitigate, and project its future. If we take the temporality of mining, for example, we can see that actually this temporality, and we think of the four populations that I was identifying before, we can actually see that each of these populations has a different relation to temporality. That goes from centuries, from a life future, to a moment decision, to a project, time driven. And also, each of these populations that overlap in the territory have a different scale of action. I believe this image is exemplifies very well, no? The precarious and sensitive ecology, which is represented by the river, Loa, which goes to the region, with the lines of the mining surveys that remind like of super studio photoshops of colonization of the land. And how these overlap in the most clear manifestation, which is urbanism, no? And so if we think of landscape as the result of genetic, dynamic, and functional relations through which all the components of a territory get connected to each other, then I believe that landscape is the only medium that would allow us to consider a collection of different populations characterized by different scales, interests, aspirations, and timelines, and project this transformation into a community. And landscape is what can actually set the rules, can set the narrative, can define the board, the field of action through which each of these groups can play their game. And we took this literally in the studio last year, we did about Calama, and we actually asked the students to develop games in which every group was represented in a way and could play at different scales, different boards, like we defined different ways of project, try to play on the temporality, how could this be manipulated, always keeping in mind an overall view of all how these different groups can interact with each other, or how can we set that one group, the decision of one population, can actually leave a legacy to another, as like the workshop proposed by Mark Coulthorpe, which is here with us, and Alex and Stanislas here, was forcing the students to think, no? So how can we think of these four populations that are actually indifferent to each other as a whole system that can leave something to the other? And how can this be expanded to the territory, no? So for example, imagining this operational system leaving a legacy, a landscape legacy to the territory. Or how can we think of, for example, the process of reclaim, which has been characterizing all the intervention on landscape as urbanism, no? In matter of mining. How can we think of it as also a way to launch new economies to the regions? Economies that can actually take advantage of all these multiple scales that extraction operation has already set on the ground, no? Like this project that Serena D'Ambrosio proposed and developed her thesis. If we look at this image, it really synthesizes all the different scales with which we have to interact, we have to tackle this process. And so, to conclude, ever since like communication and transport system, globalization and the connection to the local has become so diffuse and prominent in the contemporary society, thinking of the territory as a projection of the globe on a map cannot work any longer. No? This is what Calama teaches us so explicitly. And the idea of landscape as the internet is the best way that we can understand an environment which is global but nevertheless local. It's the only medium through which we can think that every individual or collectivity or population can actually make its own impact on the territory and allow these different impacts to be seen and understood as a whole. And as I was saying in the beginning, I believe that Calama is a very exemplificatory example because these different contracts and populations are very evident, easily identifiable. But this, I have seen this happening in many other cities across South America, like groups that belong to a different time frame and have a different scale impact and with a very different relationship to the territory. And it's actually what is happening in many of the manifestations of contemporary urbanism also in Europe, North America. Let's just think about tourism or global commerce or the phenomenon of migration. So this is what I believe like we can start learning from South America.